So we're here to talk about transitions again, and we had lots of great comments on the first transitions video that we did, and we know that it is a tricky area to kind of wrap your head around, but once you've wrapped your head around it, um, it can make things a whole bunch easier. So we've got a couple of ideas today that we'll talk about, and also an exercise for you to try at home. So we'll start with
transitions for restorative and yin, which was a question that came out last time. And that is a very good question because restorative has more props, I would say, than a yin class, although you can also make a yin class have a lot of props. But generally, one has more props than the other. Regardless, you're still going to be using props. But for a yin class, also you could basically, let's imagine that you're using props for yin and for restorative, because yin could also be done without props. So the transitions between a yin of transitions for our yin and a restorative class, what I would say that is very important to do is to make sure that the pose is finished. What does this mean? That means that, let's say you are in a sitting forward fold and you have brought the student in a sitting forward fold, whether it's a yin or a restorative class. And then after that sitting forward fold, you want the student to lie down. It is very different for a teacher to say, as the student is in the sitting forward fold in a place of contemplation, it is very different if the teacher says, now begin to find your way into Shavasana or into lying down. The teacher could also say, very slowly from your forward fold, start to roll the spine back up, one vertebra at a time, until the head is the last one to come up. Then you can keep your eyes closed. The spine is in neutral, is upright, and just leave a moment of silence there or a few cycles of breath. So then the pose is finished. The pose was, the student went into it, stayed there for a few minutes, the student came back out, done. Then from there, you can come down and transition into a Shavasana. You can say to people, gather your props, whatever you want to use for Shavasana, start to find your way to Shavasana. So, or any other pose. So what I'm saying is making sure that you bring the student into the pose and you have the student come out of the pose and keep them in a neutral spine moment before you take them to the next pose. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at there. Do you want to add anything to that, Mark?
Yeah, I think that for slower practices, the transitions are generally slower and they sort of match with the energy of that practice. So for example, in a restorative class, and you're maybe going to be bringing your students from seated down onto the back. So just thinking about what's the intention behind a restorative class, how could we make that transition have that energy and that intention of the practice? So instead of maybe doing what we might normally do in a hatha class, which is scooch towards the top of the mat, arms out in front, slowly rolling down using the core, how can I transition my students from seated to lying down in a way that is reflective of this style of practice? And so the transition might look the same, but the speed of it might be different, or perhaps you've found a lovely different sort of softer way to come down onto the back. Maybe there's way more options than you might offer in a hatha class because you have the time and the space. So the transitions tend to match the style of class that we're doing. They are essentially sort of anatomically the same, perhaps, but it just takes a little bit of reflective thought to think about what those might look like, because then the whole practice itself feels sort of woven together. So I think that's what makes a really wonderful yoga class, is when the poses and the transitions and the language and the voice and all those elements have the same intention, and it feels so sort of holistic and together. And so if you are teaching, like I teach a lot of gentle hatha and restorative and yin, and the idea of the transitions is the same. How do we safely move between A and B? And just knowing that they might need to be adjusted based on the style of practice that you're doing.
And then having said that, for faster paced classes like vinyasa, you might end up giving the students less cues because you're moving with the breath. So in our program, and this is different from other programs, it might be different from other programs. In our program, we teach that at the beginning of the class, let's say that you're going to teach a sun salutation and it's a vinyasa class, so you're teaching a sun salutation. For the first cycle of sun salutations, to just be a little bit slower with more cues than if you were to be moving faster through each movement with the breath. So the students kind of start to get used to the rhythm and start to know the pattern of the movements of the sequence, because sun salutations repeat one after the other. So, and this also happens for, let's say that there is a sequence of a few poses you want to put together that you're also going to repeat in your class over and over. It doesn't have to be the classical sun salutation. Could be another sequence of linked poses. Same thing. The first one you do it slowly, maybe a few more cues, maybe a few repetitions on each part. Let's say you're doing inhale, arms up, exhale, hands to chest. Inhale, arms up, exhale, hands to the chest. Next one is a forward fold. Inhale, arms up, exhale, forward fold. Inhale, halfway up. Let's do that again. Exhale, forward fold. Inhale, halfway up. So the first one, you might also repeat each movement in that sequence, or you might spend more time on each movement, giving more cues to the students. But then eventually, as you continue to do that sequence over and over and over, then you start to sort of like take cues out. So then you start to move more with the breath. So as the class gets, or as the style gets faster, you are going to be taking cues out from your transitions until maybe you just inhale halfway up, exhale, forward fold. Inhale, step back into plank, exhale, chaturanga. But you have already explained what all those poses are at the beginning. So slower pace classes, matching the transitions that are also slow and matching that style of the class, perhaps more cueing. If it's yin or restorative, using lots of props, so cueing the props, and maybe giving people different options to transition. And then the faster the pace or the faster the style of the class is, then there is also the cues are going to change and might become a little bit faster and maybe less cueing for that. Anything to add?
Yeah, well, I have a question.
Yeah.
Because I think it comes up a lot. So we're talking about, now we're sort of moving into talking about sun salutations.
Right.
So what is the difference between the cues for the sun salutation and the transitions for the sun salutation?
So the difference is that they begin, as I mentioned before, they begin, you're cueing the poses, but you're also cueing the transitions in a way that is inhale to bring the arms up, exhale, forward fold. That is the transition, forward fold.
So just to like, because we sometimes put them all together.
Right.
And so I think, when we're saying like this is about transitions or this is a transition, it can get complicated when we like lump things together, because just what you're explaining now is that the cueing and the transitions are interwoven sometimes
in like sun salutations.
In sun salutation and in poses. When we're learning a pose, sometimes the transition to come out of the pose is in there. It's just in the way that we cue. So it's not easy sometimes to pull those things out.
Right.
But
to find the boundary between a transition,
like identify like this is a transition, this is a cue. But many times the transition's part of the cueing.
Yeah, and vice versa.
And then there's transitions that are strictly just transitions to move the body into different places, seated, hands and knees, like that kind of thing. So just to clear that up before we keep going, because I think that's where for most people the idea of transitions becomes tricky.
Yeah. So, and just to reiterate, if you're a new student and you are working on your practicum, keep it simple.
Yeah.
If you find that vinyasa and you want to teach a vinyasa class and it's just becoming a lot of poses and a lot of transitions, keep it simple. Maybe just teach a hatha to begin with. And then the more you teach hatha classes, then the more comfortable you would feel cueing, and then eventually vinyasa might slowly start to become a little bit easier for you to teach. So then when we go from standing, inhale to bring the arms up, exhale, forward fold, the exhale forward fold, the transition.
Because the next pose is the standing forward fold.
Exactly, because the next pose is the standing forward fold.
And the next pose is...
But actually, before we continue, so just to sort of like, I guess in a way to reiterate what I just said before about adding more cues at the beginning. So for my first cycle of sun salutations, I can say, inhale to bring the arms up, exhale, micro bend the knees, hinge at the hips, bring the upper body forward, forward fold. So I just have those 3 cues. It's not always the cues I said, but let's just say that those are the 3 cues that I choose to say on that first coming from Tadasana to forward fold. So micro bend the knees, hinge at the hips, bring the chest to your thighs, forward fold. Then you do the rest of the sequence of sun salutation. The second time you come back to that sun salutation, inhale to bring the arms up, exhale, micro bend the knees, chest to thighs, forward fold. I took out the hip cue. I'm not saying hinge at the hips anymore. Then I'll do my sun salutation, the rest of the poses that go with it. Then the third time that I come back to the sun salutation, I say, inhale to bring the arms up, exhale, micro bend the knees, forward fold. So slowly picking those cues out. And so then you can slowly start to move with the breath, which is what you want to do. So so for vinyasa, the cues and the transitions might even be more in sort of like interwoven. And then the boundary between a cue and a transition might get a bit more complicated. But those are things that with practice, it just becomes second nature. And then you don't even have to differentiate what a transition and a cue is. It's just they're all cues to get you moving. They're all cues of movement, basically.
Well, and like a class with no, I think we said this last time, but a class with no transitions is not telling people how to move into the next shape. So that's just being like, downward dog, shift, downward dog, plank, shoulders stacked over wrists, all the cues for plank, chaturanga. You know, like if you're not giving more, it's basically just more detail to move the body between the shapes. And then in addition to that, we have the cues for the actual shapes themselves. So, I mean, we've all been to many yoga classes, and we know how much the teacher is speaking because you are cueing the transitions and the poses themselves. And it really depends. So just adding on to what Juan just said, like you might be with a group of people who are new beginners. And maybe you use the same cues and the same amount of cues for transitions the whole class because they're brand new to it. And we all know how strange yoga can feel sometimes the first time we're in a class. We might not learn in one round that a sun salutation is what it is. And we might not, the students might not be getting the hang of that. So you have to keep reiterating all those same cues and transition cues over and over again. So it really depends on who you're teaching. And that's going to change. Most of us teach, if you're teaching in a public setting, most of us teach all levels classes. And that's why classes need to have that sort of balance of cues and transitions, because we have students there who have been practicing for a long time, and then we'll have students for whom it's their first class. And that goes for whether you're teaching a power class, a vinyasa class, a restorative class. Any type of student can walk into your class at any moment. And I've taught a power class, many power classes where people have come and it's their very first yoga class. And I've got students here who've been practicing for 20 years who are expecting that we're going to do crow and handstand and all these things. And I've got the person for whom it's their first class ever, and I want them to have a great experience. And so the role of a teacher then becomes in ways a little bit more challenging, but also way more fun. Like it sort of expands your mind to think about how I can teach this in a way that everybody in the room gets something out of it. And that's really a skill that comes with practice. So don't put pressure on yourself to be able to do that right away, like right off the bat. Learn the basics, and then it just comes with skill. I remember the first time I taught a power yoga class, and that happened, and I had no idea what I was going to do, but it worked because I had the foundation underneath me for how to do that.
And so should we do the sweater exercise?
So there's a game that we used to play in live trainings, which is an example of it's okay. It's not an example of the number of the amount of detail that you need to give, but something that's been coming up lately through a lot of student questions has been like, how much detail do we need to give? And so one thing that I would just love for you to sort of maybe think about is that many times in a yoga class, in a online yoga class and in an in-person yoga class, students aren't able to see the teacher. I've taught in studios that have these amazing, lovely like columns, which look beautiful when you step in, but then are really impractical because your sight line, you can't see the teacher. Or there's a bunch of students in front of you, it's a really busy class, or you're in downward dog and you can't see if the teacher's demoing what they're doing. So the words that you use and the way that you describe transitions and cues is probably, for me at least, maybe one of the most important things. I would love for students to be able to practice my classes with their eyes closed. It's not practical to do that all of the time, but I want to give enough cues so that if somebody can't see me and it's their first time, or if they're just not able to see me for the class, I would hope that they're still able to follow along. Does that make sense?
For sure.
So it's that amount of detail, which actually isn't an overwhelming amount of detail if you just sort of spend a little time practicing this. So this exercise, the sweater exercise, find someone in your life for whom you can play this with. And I'm definitely not skilled at this, and I haven't done it for a long time, but we'll do it. It's called the sweater game. Basically, instruct someone how to put a sweater on. And so this guy's going to pretend he's never put a sweater on in his life. And my job is to tell him how to do that. Which, if you think about a yoga class, someone comes to your yoga class, they've never done downward dog before. They need maybe this amount of cues to be able to do it, right? Okay. And there's going to be cues and transitions in here. Okay. So we'll do it. It's almost like we need music for this, but it's okay. Okay, so you want to put this, let's start by putting the sweater on the table, just so.
Transition. Yeah.
Well, that doesn't count. We'll start now.
Okay.
So okay. Juan, take your right hand, lift it, and place it onto the sweater on the right side of the sweater.
Okay.
It's not going to work. Take your left hand and place it on the upper left side of the sweater. Okay. Slide your right hand down to the bottom of the sweater, the bottom corner of the main part of the sweater. Take a hold of it with your fingers. let go with your left hand. Move your left hand to the opposite bottom corner of the sweater. Mm-hmm.
Keep going.
Yeah. So we sometimes also do this with anatomical cues. So we could say things like flex your elbow, but we won't get into that today.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I think, okay, so Juan, bring your hands slightly closer towards each other. No, sorry. Take your hands back to where they were. Keep your hands where they are, but just shorten the distance between your hands. Yeah, shorten it about halfway.
Okay.
Place sweater on head? No.
It's just about letting go of this one and bring it inside.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you shouldn't help me though.
No.
Well,
Okay. Let go with your right hand. Bring your right hand inside the sweater. And begin to thread your right hand to the right until you start to feel the sleeve of the right arm. Oh, yeah. But you're helping a little bit by flipping the sweater, but it's okay.
okay.
Yeah. And continue to pull the sweater with your left hand over your right hand till the hand comes through. Okay, it's good. Now, take a hold of the left side of the sweater with the right hand. Begin to place your left hand into the left edge of the sweater. Thread it through as far as you can. And then take your right hand to the left sleeve of the sweater and begin pulling the sleeve over the left hand. Boom. Bring both hands to the bottom edge of the sweater closest to your face. Lift the hands up over the head and bring your head through the sweater. Take your hands to the top of the sweater by your head and pull the sweater back over the head. Now take your hands to the bottom edge of the front of the sweater and pull the sweater down the chest. That's exactly how you would wear a sweater. So that was a lot of
Cueing.
cueing.
Yeah.
That was a lot of cueing.
It's also a sweater.
It's a sweater.
So it's complicated.
It's complicated, but it's a lot of details for something that I think you should be able to do without thinking. And then when you realize that you can't do it without thinking, it actually takes a little bit more work. So it's a good example. It's more of a good example of cueing, I would say, and the amount of words that we need, but it relates to transitions because transitions also need a fair number of details. And sometimes we might just say to students, lie down on the back from seated. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that because they probably know how to do it, but it's a really lovely thing to give more detail and options for how they might come down onto their back. And so it's an example if one knows how to put on a sweater. And when I have to give the details for how to do that, it takes a little bit more time. He doesn't need the details, but in the sort of setting of a yoga class, people are there to hear your instruction and your guidance. And so we might take it for granted that it's really easy for everyone from seated to lie down on their back, but we don't know everybody's story about everybody who's in the room, and maybe someone will discover a really lovely way to come down onto the back that they hadn't thought about before.
Should we quickly talk about these transitions that we have here?
Sure. Can I say one more thing though?
Yeah.
The other thing too, just one last thing about why we might cue transitions is that if you've ever been in a yoga class where the teacher has said, for example, okay, from your back, come to seated. And some people literally like jump up off the mat. Like it's like they got a shock or something.
Right.
They're there, ready. And the intention when I've said that is, well, actually to roll over to one side, to slowly, fitting with the energy of the class that we're wanting to cultivate. But if we're not given sort of the guidance for how to do that in a mindful, meaningful way, then people will literally just like get bit, they're there, and you just have to keep going. So it also helps you to sort of set that tone when you are giving more instructions for your transitions. Okay, yes.
So before we finish, we just have a few foundational transitions to talk about. So for instance, from seated to tabletop. So from seated to tabletop, you can say something like, reach your hands forward. So let's say that the legs are crossed. And so reach your hands forward, shift the weight to your hands, come onto your hands and knees in a tabletop position. Or you can take your hands forward but bring the legs to one side. Instead of going through the legs crossed, shift the legs through one side, place the hands forward, shift forward onto your hands and knees. So you basically need to either go through the legs crossed or move the legs to one side to shift forward to your hands and knees. So it's 2 or 3 sentences that you need.
And I for myself, I like to let people know where we're going. So if I was doing that, I might say, from seated position, we'll be coming into tabletop. Swing your legs out to one side, bring your hands out in front of you, and then we're in tabletop position. Because some people will want to find their own way, and then I don't have to maybe worry about cueing everybody all the possible different ways. But I'm going to let you know where we're going, and then I'm going to give you an option or two about how to get there, and then the rest is up to you.
Yeah, and that is a good point. And you can even say, let's say you just finished teaching seated forward fold, tabletop. Like you can even just jump tabletop. Move the legs to one side, shift your hands forward. So then, people are already sort of like in their minds knowing where they're going. Downward dog to forward fold. From downward dog, look to your hands and slowly step your feet forward into your forward fold, or walk your feet forward into your forward fold, or step one leg at a time into forward fold. And then, if it's a power class, when people say jump your feet forward or hop forward, there's so many ways. But again, just a couple of sentences to get to the front.
And again, I would say, from downward dog, coming into forward fold, bend your knees, step, walk, or hop your feet towards your hands.
That's it. Plank to downward dog. So from plank, begin to shift the weight back. Lift your pelvis up toward the ceiling as you start to press the hands away from the body.
Yeah, and there's and another one you might use is the engaging the core too, right?
Right.
In that transition.
Right.
So you could.
I haven't been using those, but it's very important to sort of like create, like we would talk to in the video.
In video one,
before,
stability.
Find the stability. So root your hands, root your feet, or engage your abdominal muscles, or feel the midline as you start to reach back or forward, whatever you want to go.
Yeah, you can make them your own.
Yeah. Seated to lying down. Start to bring your legs forward. Scooch the body to the front of the mat. Contract your abdominal muscles. You can reach your arms forward and slowly start to round the spine as you lean back, and you start to lower the spine one vertebra at a time.
Well, and we can put the breath in there too, right? So inhale, reach the arms forward. Exhale, slowly roll yourself down onto the back. So,
standing to seated.
Standing to seated.
So let's say Tadasana. Yeah. Tadasana to Sukhasana.
So this is where I think there's, I don't know that there's tons of ways to do this. I think the loveliest way to do it is some sort of flow down, regardless of the, if you're in a restorative or yin class, you're likely not going to be doing this, but in a hatha class, let's say hatha or vinyasa, is just to do a half sort of sun salutation down.
Right.
You can roll down like the chin to chest way, which I sometimes do in slower practices.
Like one vertebra at a time.
Yeah, or walk the hands down the thighs. But an easy way to do it is to inhale, reach the arms up. Exhale, micro bend the knees, fold down into forward fold, hinging at the hips. And then from there you can Begin to bend the knees a little more. Place the hands fully to the mat and mindfully step your knees back into tabletop position.
And you can also do malasana.
Yeah,
Squat.
malasana. Yeah.
So bring your hands together, and then you slowly bend your knees
As you come down to malasana,
or squat pose. Bring your hands back as you sit down.
Yeah, that's a great one too. I forgot about that.
um,
Warrior 2 to plank or
To
downward
downward
dog,
dog.
which we did talk about last time. But
Yeah, let's go to Warrior 2 to plank.
okay, so Warrior 2 to plank. So you're in Warrior 2, inhale, exhale, bring windmill, sometimes is the word, the hands down to the mat as you pivot the back heel, hands framing the front foot, and then step your front foot back into a plank or a tabletop position.
That's it.
Boom.
Keep it simple.
Yeah, or you're and if you're coming to stand, then obviously you wouldn't be passing through plank. You're going to come to stand in Tadasana, and the transition cues would be a little different. Well, very different.
Yeah. And you can say things like, from Warrior 2, root through your feet, engage your core, windmill the hands down, step front leg to plank.
Yeah, and if you're super duper curious about transitions, just listen to or take a few classes and see the different things that teachers do. So that's always a good way to do it, is to just
For sure.
learn by example sometimes and see what you come up with. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah, I think this is really fun, and if you have any questions about transitions, just pop them in the comments. We'll definitely get back to those and we'll answer them for you. And if any questions come up about your practicum and transitions, you can always just email the support to the support at youryogaflow.com, and we are super duper happy to help you. Okay,
Bye everyone.
take care.